Halima said, if you're going to tell me, you have to tell me something happened with my son. So then Halima told her the story, which I'm sure many of you are aware of, and that is the story of the splitting of the chest of the Prophet ﷺ. So the story was that the Prophet ﷺ was at the age of 4, and he himself narrated this. The Prophet ﷺ himself has narrated this story in hadith, that he was outside playing with his brother. Now when we say brother, we mean a foster brother, the son of Halima, who was the same age. His name was Abdullah. So Halima had children. Halima had at least 2 daughters, one called Shayma, one called Unaysa, and she had a son called Abdullah, who was born the same year as the Prophet ﷺ. So the Prophet ﷺ was playing, or he was with Abdullah looking after the sheep at the age of 4. Again, we learn a lot that, I said playing by mistake, the hadith mentions they were looking after the sheep. At the age of 4, they were already given these responsibilities. And they were behind the house, or they were away from the tent. And suddenly Abdullah came running, shouting to his mother and to his father, "Qutila Muhammad, Qutila Muhammad." His words were, "Muhammad has been killed, Muhammad has been killed." So obviously Halima and her husband Harith came out running to check, and they saw the Prophet ﷺ standing. He was now standing and his face was completely pale. What had happened was, what the child Abdullah had witnessed was, as they were together, suddenly a man came that they'd never seen before. This man, it was the angel Jibreel alayhi salam. He took the Prophet ﷺ, the 4-year-old blessed body of the Prophet ﷺ, and laid him down and cut his chest open. And this could be visibly seen in our physical world. So this was a physical operation. And that other child saw this, he witnessed all of this. And then he took out the heart of the Prophet ﷺ. By this time that other boy must have run away and he was shouting, "Muhammad has been killed." But what he did was he took out the heart of the Prophet ﷺ and washed the heart. And he removed something from the heart and then placed it back in. So there's lots to be understood from this, but this event is a symbol. It's a symbol of one of the most important beliefs that we have about the Prophet ﷺ, is that he is ma'soom. Ma'soom, and we have this belief for all prophets, that they are divinely protected from ever committing a sin. It's not that they are unable, like the angels are unable to sin. Angels don't have that level of free will. But the prophets, they have the free will, but would never sin, and they can never sin in that sense. So within the heart of the human being, we have a heart, and as we know, we don't need to. Everybody understands that the heart is the center of the body, biologically, physically. That all of the blood of the body comes from the heart, or it goes to the heart, and it has to pass through the heart. So similarly, our soul, it's most concentrated in the heart. Now, the actual reality of the soul, Allah tells us in the Quran that we can never fully understand this. But the ulama explain that this much we understand, is that the soul is most concentrated in the heart. Which is why even when we talk even in English, even without thinking of this, we say that in my heart I believe this. Now apparently we think from our brain. Why do we say in our heart? Because our soul is concentrated in the heart. And that's why the heart is associated with things like love, or things like courage and passion. It's about having a heart. So the soul is concentrated in the heart. It's throughout the body, but it's mostly concentrated in the heart. So there is some connection. This is a world which we have never seen, we cannot possibly understand. And after death, all of these things will become clear to us. But there's some sort of connection between, of course, there's a connection between the soul and the body. Which is why when a person dies, the soul exits the body. So there's also some sort of connection with the soul and the heart. So what was being purified was the human desire, that or the human tendency to be attracted by their desires, not necessarily sin, but their desires, because the human tendency to be attracted by their desires is the main cause of all sin that we commit. So this was removed by the angel. Now, all of this was not necessary. Allah didn't need to do this, but this was a symbol, was symbolic of the purity of the Prophet ﷺ. And also in the angelic worlds, certain things need to happen. Allah shows the angels certain things to prove the rank of the Prophet ﷺ in the minds or in the opinion of the angels as well. So this was a connection, this was a rare instance where the angelic world and our world was combined. And this was also to prepare the Prophet ﷺ's heart and his soul for what was to come in his life, the revelation. Allah mentions that this Quran, if it was to be sent down to mountains, the mountains would crumble. So you can imagine if mountains were to crumble, a human heart would suffer. So obviously Allah was giving strength to the Prophet ﷺ's heart that he can bear the burden, he can bear the task of receiving the revelation of the Quran. So this happened when the Prophet ﷺ was 4 years old. There are other narrations that mention that this happened at other times of the life, but the only other one that we are certain about, and it's definitely narrated authentically, is that it happened when the Prophet ﷺ was about 50, just before the night, or during the night of Mi'raj, when the Prophet ﷺ was taken from Mecca to Palestine to Jerusalem, and from Jerusalem to the heavens. So before that whole journey to the heavens took place, this was done again. Again, that we've sometimes explained that there may have been a time in the past where things like this were hard to imagine, but nowadays it's very easy to imagine. Doctors do this every day, so it's very easy to imagine. If you can imagine a doctor doing it, taking a heart and correcting a heart, why can't we imagine angels doing it? So it's very easy to understand with modern technology, which ironically should make things, so I explain, that ironically modern technology should make our iman stronger, because it's easier for us to understand things that for all human history since Adam was hard to understand. The concept of our actions getting weighed. Historically, if you weigh something, you can only weigh something that's physical. Nowadays we can have all of these different meters to measure all types of things, right? So at the age of 4, Halima has now brought the Prophet ﷺ back to his mother Amina. And Amina said, so maybe you are fearful. When Amina heard the story, she said, maybe you are fearful that some jinn or some demon has affected my son. When Halima saw this and saw the Prophet ﷺ standing and he was all pale, and she picked him up and took him back home, Halima's husband said to her, as much as you love the child, you need to take him back to his family, because if a shaitan, if a demon affects him in our care, then we will be blamed for this, so we have to take him back. So obviously the Arabs at the time, they believed in demons and shayateen. In fact, many scholars are of the opinion that before the Prophet ﷺ was made a prophet, the jinns, it was easier for the jinns to impede into our world, or to encroach into our world. It was easier for them to possess human beings. It was easier for them to sometimes become visible to human beings. Just like Allah has made a veil between us and the angels, there's a veil between us and the jinns. That's for our benefit, because if the jinns were to have their way with humans, then we'd all lose our minds. So the protection, in fact there are angels specifically for every human being to protect us from the jinn. And we have du'as, the famous Muslim du'as that we read all the time. A lot of them, if we look at what the Prophet says, he says, if you do this, then shaitan will not be able to get you. If you read the dua for entering one's home, then shaitan will not enter with you. If you read the dua for leaving one's home, then shaitan will not be able to affect you, as you're outside. If you read the dua before eating and with your right hand, then shaitan will not partake in the food with you. If you read the dua before going to relieve yourself, again the dua literally mentions the jinn inside it. So a lot of the power of the jinns and the shayateen was taken away with the advent of Islam. So much so that some of the jinns, the way that they would, one of the ways that they would entice humans to worship them is, or to give sacrifices to them, is by predicting the future, fortune tellers. And they would listen in to the angels sometimes discussing amongst themselves events that were written in the taqdeer, in the destiny of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the angels would sometimes discussing it amongst themselves because they were appointed to carry a certain act out. And the jinns would listen in onto them, and then they would be taught by the angels, and the angels would help them with something. So as this would happen, the jinn would maybe hear one sentence, and mix that one truth with 100 lies, and this is how the fortune tellers would sometimes get things correct. But the jinns would require certain things from the humans before that they serve them. They wouldn't serve a human for no reason. So So all of this became, it still happens of course, but all of this became weakened after the advent of Islam. And this is mentioned in Surah Jinn in the Quran. It's not mentioned the way it's mentioned in Surah Jinn that the jinns are no longer able to listen in to the angels talking amongst themselves. That particular part they were banned from this. Because now is the era of the Quran, now is the era of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So they were weakened in this sense. So we can apply that. So this is mentioned in the Quran. But some scholars say we can apply that to other things as well. And perhaps the other powers of the jinns were also weakened. The point being is that the pagans of Arabia did fully believe and lived and saw the jinns many times. In fact, just because this is also relevant, one of the customs was if somebody's traveling at night and it's desert and you need to rest for the night, it's scary, it's dark, you're in the wilderness, then they would go to the top of a mountain and shout A'udhu. They'd say, I seek refuge or I take refuge. Instead of saying Allah, they would say, in the master of this life, Sayyidi Hadha al-Wadi. And they would say this like 3 times or a few times, calling out to the jinn that I'm entering your refuge. So this is how they practically worship the jinn. Anyway, so that was a bit of a tangent on their belief in the jinn. So Halima and her husband feared that something may have happened to the Prophet ﷺ, so they hurried out. And Amina then said to her that don't worry about my son, because I have seen certain things with my son that I know that Allah will protect him. Obviously she had seen the light, she had also seen a dream in which an angel had told her what to name the Prophet ﷺ. So Amina was not scared, and then she took her son was now with Amina for 2 more years. At the age of 6, the Prophet ﷺ was 6 years old, Amina passed away. And she passed away on the way back from the journey, just like the Prophet ﷺ's father, Abdullah. He passed away when he traveled to Syria. So Amina had also passed away in a shorter way. She and Ayman, as I mentioned, were the same. Ayman, Amina,